I had spent all morning making Reagan's favorite lemon ricotta pancakes for her 29th birthday. The apartment smelled like citrus and sugar, and I'd even put out the good plates, the ones I usually saved for holidays. It was almost 7 p.m., and she was already an hour late. Typical. My name's Zoe. I'm 33 and I manage a retail store. I've always been the responsible one, the one who cleans up messes, especially Reagan's. She's my younger sister, and our relationship has always been this weird dance of me trying to keep her from falling and her doing everything she could to trip herself. Before we move on, tell me where you're watching from. I love mapping my viewers. The doorbell finally rang, a weak, hesitant sound that wasn't like Reagan at all. When I opened it, she stood there, looking like a ghost. Her usually vibrant red hair was dull, hanging limp around her face, and her eyes, normally so full of a reckless spark, were vacant. She was wearing a long sleeved top, even though it was a warm spring evening. Hey, she mumbled, stepping inside. She didn't meet my gaze. Hey yourself, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Happy birthday, stranger. Pancakes are getting cold. She gave a weak smile and drifted toward the kitchen table. As she reached for a glass of water, her sleeve rode up just an inch. That's when I saw it. A dark, ugly bruise, blooming purple and yellow just above her wrist bone. It looked like a handprint. My breath hitched. I knew. I'd seen enough bruises in my life, though never on Reagan. Not like this. Not from Johnny. Reagan? I said, my voice low. What's that? She snatched her hand back, pulling the sleeve down quickly. Nothing. I bumped it. Don't lie to me, I said, walking closer. I reached out, gently took her arm, and pushed the fabric back. The bruise was worse than I thought, angry and swollen. Who did this? Her eyes welled up instantly. She pulled away and stumbled into the living room, collapsing onto my old, worn couch. Her shoulders started to shake. I followed, sitting beside her, not touching her, just waiting. It was Johnny, she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. He he got angry about the kids. Zachary was crying and he grabbed me. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Johnny Sutton, her husband. Charming to everyone else, the life of the party, but I'd always seen the glint of something else in his eyes, a possessive, controlling edge. Reagan had always dismissed my concerns, saying I was just jealous or didn't understand their love. She started to sob, a deep, racking sound that tore at me. I don't know what to do, Zoe. I can't, I can't live like this anymore. He's different now. He's always angry. This was it. The opening. The chance I'd been waiting for, hoping for. Reagan finally admitting the truth. You don't have to, I said, my voice firm but gentle. You can leave. Tonight. She looked up, her face streaked with tears. But where would I go? I have nothing. No money. He controls everything. I have money, I told her, the words coming out before I could second guess myself. My emergency fund. It's not much, but it's enough to get you started. A deposit on an apartment, a few months' rent, enough to get you out. I had $4,800 saved. It was everything. Every extra shift, every skipped takeout meal, every penny I'd squirreled away for a rainy day. This felt like a hurricane. $4,800, I said, making it concrete. It's yours, not a loan. You don't pay me back. Just use it to get out. For you, for Hope, Zachary, Tabitha, for the kids. Her eyes widened. Zoe, I can't. That's your whole. Yes, it is. I cut her off. And I'm giving it to you. You just have to promise me one thing. Promise me you'll leave him. For good. She nodded, tears still streaming down her face, but a flicker of something new in her eyes. Hope. Or maybe just desperation. I promise, Zoe. I swear. I'll leave him. I'll take the kids and go. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, a rare sense of hope blooming despite the grim circumstances. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe this time she would choose herself. A week later, that hope evaporated. I was scrolling through Instagram on my lunch break, mindlessly flicking past sponsored posts and influencer selfies, when I stopped dead. There, on my feed, was a picture of Reagan and Johnny. They were on a beach, white sand, turquoise water. Bali. Reagan was laughing, her arms slung around Johnny's neck. Both of them were tanned, smiling, looking utterly blissful. And they both had fresh tattoos on their wrists, matching symbols. The caption underneath read, "Healing together, stronger than before." Soulmates. Bali retreat, Shard, new beginnings. 10 months. 10 long, silent months. After seeing that Bali post, a cold, hard shell had formed around me. I deleted Instagram, blocked Reagan's number, and ignored the few emails she tried to send. Each one was a pathetic attempt at reconciliation, a vague apology, or a request for something small. I deleted them unread. The $4,800 wasn't just money, it was a piece of me, a desperate hope for her freedom, and she'd used it to buy a deeper leash. The betrayal felt like a physical ache, a constant reminder of how foolish I'd been to believe her. My life had settled back into its quiet rhythm. Work, my small apartment, the occasional dinner with a friend. I'd almost convinced myself I didn't have a sister anymore, that the chaotic, destructive force that was Reagan had finally been excised from my life. It was a fragile peace, built on a foundation of bitter resentment. It was a Sunday, a little after noon, the kind of quiet, uneventful day where the only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bird outside my window. I was curled on the couch, half reading a book, half dozing. My phone, usually silent on Sundays, buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was a telemarketer, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice thick with sleep. A small, muffled sob came through the line. Then a whisper, so faint I almost missed it. "Aunt Zoe?" My heart stopped. It was Hope, my 12-year-old niece. Her voice was thin, reedy, laced with terror. "Hope, is that you? What's wrong?" "Where are you?" I sat bolt upright, the book clattering to the floor. "I'm in the closet," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's screaming again. Johnny, he's yelling at Zachary. He said it's Zachary's fault Mom's crying." My blood ran cold. Zachary, my 9-year-old nephew, was a sensitive kid. He'd always been withdrawn, and I knew he'd started bedwetting under stress a few years ago. Johnny blaming him, it was a familiar pattern of abuse. "Where's your mom, Hope?" I asked, my voice tight. "She's outside," Hope choked out. She's pretending it's not happening. She told me to stay in here. She locked the door." My mind raced. Reagan, outside, enabling it, locking her eldest child in a closet to escape the noise. It was worse than I'd imagined. The quiet rage I'd nursed for 10 months solidified into a cold, sharp resolve. This wasn't about money or betrayal anymore. This was about my nieces and nephew. "Okay, Hope," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hand was shaking. "Listen to me very carefully. Are your brother and sister safe right now? Can you hear them?" "Zachary's crying," she whispered. "Tabitha's with him. She's 5. She's scared." "Okay, stay exactly where you are. Do not come out. Do you hear me? I'm going to call for help, and I'm coming there. Do you understand?" "Yes, Aunt Zoe," she whimpered. "Good girl. I'll be there as fast as I can." I hung up, my fingers fumbling. I didn't even hesitate. I pulled up the Child Protective Services number on my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I gave them Reagan and Johnny Sutton's address, explained the anonymous tip from a concerned family member, the screaming, the child in the closet, the history of emotional abuse. They assured me they'd dispatch someone immediately. Then I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and practically sprinted out the door. The drive to their house, usually about 25 minutes, felt like an eternity. Every red light was an unbearable delay. My mind was a whirlwind of worst case scenarios, images of a terrified Hope, a sobbing Zachary, a bewildered Tabitha. When I pulled onto their street, my stomach clenched. A police cruiser was already parked outside their house, lights off but clearly visible. Another car, an unmarked sedan, was also there, likely CPS. I parked a few houses down and got out, my legs feeling like jelly. I walked quickly towards the house, my eyes scanning the windows. The front door was open, and I could hear voices, muffled but agitated. As I got closer, I saw Reagan standing on the porch, her arms crossed, her face flushed. Johnny was beside her, looking agitated but composed, his arm resting casually on her lower back. He was still the charming facade, even now. A police officer, a tall, serious looking woman, was talking to them. As I approached, Reagan's eyes locked onto mine, her face twisted into a mask of shock, then anger. Zoe, what are you doing here? She practically shrieked, her voice rising in pitch. The officer turned to me, her brow furrowed. Ma'am, do you know these people? Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I'm Reagan's sister, Zoe Warren. Reagan stepped forward, her eyes blazing. She's obsessed, officer. She's been harassing us for months. She's making this all up. She's jealous. She's always been jealous. Johnny nodded, putting on his concerned husband act. My wife's right. My sister in law has some issues. She's fabricating these claims. We're a happy family. My jaw tightened. The nerve. I looked past them, towards the open door. That's when I saw Hope. She was standing just inside the doorway, her eyes wide and fearful, clutching a small dark object in her hand. Our eyes met for a split second. Then, as the officer turned back to Reagan, Hope took a quick, decisive step forward. She slipped the small object into my hand, her fingers brushing mine, before retreating back inside the house, disappearing from view. It was a small black flash drive. I drove home in a daze, the small flash drive clutched in my hand. Reagan's accusations, Johnny's smug denials, the police officer's skeptical gaze, it all faded into the background. All I could think about was Hope, her terrified eyes, the desperate, silent plea in that fleeting touch. As soon as I got back to my apartment, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. A folder popped open, filled with video files. I clicked on the first one. The screen flickered to life, showing a shaky, dark shot of what looked like a hallway. The audio was immediate and jarring. Johnny's voice, loud and guttural, filled my small living room. You think this is funny, you little brat? You think I won't find out? Then a crash, the sound of something shattering, followed by Zachary's high pitched wail. The camera jerked, and I saw a glimpse of Johnny, his face contorted in rage, leaning over a cowering Zachary. He grabbed my nephew by the collar, yanking him up. You ruined it! You always ruin everything! My stomach churned. I watched, horrified, as Johnny shook Zachary, who was now sobbing uncontrollably. The video cut abruptly. I clicked on the next one, my breath catching in my throat. This one was even harder to watch. It was brighter, clearly taken during the day. Reagan was in the frame, her back to the camera, yelling, Hope, stop making things worse! You just need to be quiet! You're going to make him even angrier. Hope's small voice, barely audible, said, But he hurt Zachary, Mom. He did not. You're lying. You're just trying to cause trouble. Reagan shrieked, turning slightly so I could see her face. It was twisted, not with anger at Johnny, but with a cold fury directed at her own child. The betrayal in her voice was sickening. I watched a few more clips. Johnny throwing things, Johnny screaming, Reagan either absent or actively berating the children for provoking him. There was one where Tabitha, my sweet, smiling 5-year-old niece, was huddled in a corner, covering her ears, her little face pale and terrified. I felt bile rise in my throat. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it before I threw up. This wasn't just emotional abuse. This was physical. This was a nightmare. And Reagan was not just enabling it. She was participating in the gaslighting, turning on her own children. I knew who I needed to call. Keith. Keith Powell, my ex-boyfriend from college, now a civil lawyer. He was 34, a year older than me, and we'd stayed friends, albeit distantly. There was always a lingering tension between us, a sense of unfinished business, but he was smart, level-headed, and knew the law. I called him, my voice still shaky. Keith, I need your help. It's about Reagan. And the kids. He listened patiently as I recounted everything, the call from Hope, the police, Reagan's lies, and finally the horrifying videos. When I finished, there was a long silence on his end. Zoe, he said, his voice grave. This is serious. This is grounds for an emergency custody petition. We need to move fast. Emergency custody? The words felt huge, overwhelming. Yes. Based on what you've described and the evidence you have, a judge might grant temporary guardianship to you, especially if the children are in immediate danger. We'll need to file the petition first thing tomorrow morning. The next day was a blur of legal forms, affidavits, and consultations with Keith. He explained the process, the uphill battle, the need for solid evidence. We filed the petition for emergency custody, citing the clear and present danger to the children. The court date was set for a few weeks out. Almost immediately, CPS started making visits to Reagan and Johnny's house. I knew this because Hope managed to send me a quick coded text from a burner phone she'd somehow acquired. Lady in uniform came. Mom and Johnny were super nice. Reagan's retaliation was swift and predictable. My phone, which I'd unblocked for legal reasons, started buzzing with notifications. She was on social media, specifically Facebook and Instagram, posting a flurry of updates. Her first post was a picture of her and Johnny, looking somber but resolute. The caption read, "Dealing with false accusations from a very troubled family member. It's heartbreaking when jealousy turns into malicious lies. But we're stronger together. Our love will overcome this." Then came the really twisted stuff. Pictures from what she called their healing retreat in Bali, but now with a new narrative. There were photos of Johnny in a leather collar, a prop from some kind of power dynamic workshop, and Reagan smiling beside him, looking submissive. Other photos showed them in what looked like group therapy sessions, but the captions were chilling. Exploring our inner selves, understanding our roles, and embracing our true connection. This journey has made us unbreakable. They were courting sympathy online, painting me as the villain, the bitter, jealous sister trying to tear their perfect family apart. It was a sickening display of manipulation, a twisted version of therapy that seemed to only reinforce Johnny's control and Reagan's subservience. The comments section was filled with well meaning friends offering support, sending prayers, and condemning the jealous family member. It made my blood boil. They were using their abuse as a prop, a performance for public consumption, and it was disgusting. Reagan's social media performance was a gut punch, not just because of the lies, but because it forced me to confront a past I'd spent years trying to bury. Our childhood was a fractured landscape, dominated by our mother's alcoholism. She wasn't violent, not physically, but her emotional neglect was a constant, suffocating presence. She'd swing from loving to completely detached, often within the same hour. Reagan, 4 years younger than me, had always been the golden child in our mother's eyes. The one who could do no wrong, the one who could charm her out of a drunken stupor with a sweet smile. I was the quiet, responsible one, the one who made sure Reagan ate, the one who did her homework, the one who tried to keep our chaotic household from completely falling apart. I was the protector, the fixer. It was a role I'd fallen into naturally, a habit that felt impossible to break. Watching Reagan now, seeing her defend Johnny, her abuser, and turn on her own children, it was like looking into a warped mirror of our past. Had she learned this enabling behavior from our mother? Had she seen mom's reliance on alcohol and simply replaced it with a reliance on Johnny, no matter how toxic? The thought chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just about Reagan being naive, it was about a deep seated trauma that had twisted her perception of love and safety. A few days after filing the petition, I had my first official interview with Nadine Freeman, the CPS caseworker assigned to Reagan's case. She was in her early 40s with tired eyes but a no nonsense demeanor. She sat across from me in my living room, her notepad open, her expression unreadable. I recounted everything again: the bruise, the money, the Bali trip, Hope's call, the flash drive videos, Reagan's social media posts. Nadine listened, occasionally jotting down notes, her gaze unwavering. When I finished, she closed her notepad and leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Warren," she said, her voice calm and direct, "what you've described is deeply concerning. The videos are damning. However, in family court, especially with emergency custody, the bar is incredibly high. We need to prove immediate and severe danger to the children." My heart sank. "But The videos Johnny grabbing Zachary, Reagan yelling at Hope. They show emotional distress and a clear pattern of verbal abuse. Yes, Nadine conceded. And the physical incident with Zachary is very serious. But without more consistent recent documentation of physical harm, or a clear admission from the children themselves, it can be argued away as isolated incidents, or even as parental discipline by a clever lawyer. So, what are you saying? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. That it's not enough? Nadine sighed. I'm saying it's not bad enough yet for an immediate, permanent removal. We're close. But the court will want to see a pattern, not just a few incidents. They'll want to see that the children are actively in danger right now. My visits to the house, as you know, are supervised. Johnny and Reagan are on their best behavior. They're playing the part of the concerned, loving parents who are being harassed by a jealous relative. She paused, looking directly at me. You need more. Legally, we need more. Try to get the kids to document more. Discreetly. Legally. My mind immediately went to Hope. She was smart, resourceful. She'd managed to get me the flash drive. How? I asked. They're watched constantly. Nadine's gaze softened slightly. You're their aunt. You have a relationship with them. If you can establish a safe way for them to communicate with you and to document what's happening, that would be invaluable. She paused again, then added, but be careful. If Johnny finds out, it could make things worse for the kids. The next day, I bought a prepaid phone, a cheap, untraceable burner. I charged it, loaded it with a small amount of talk and text, and hid it in a discreet, padded envelope. I knew Reagan and Johnny wouldn't let me see the kids unsupervised, but I had to try. I waited until Reagan had to run an errand, something she'd posted about on social media. I drove to their house, my heart pounding. I saw Hope's bike in the driveway. I knew she sometimes played in the backyard. I took a deep breath, walked up to the side gate, and called out softly, Hope? It's Aunt Zoe. A few tense moments passed. Then Hope's head peeked around the corner of the house. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but she quickly glanced around. I held up the envelope, making eye contact. She understood. She darted out, snatched the envelope from my hand, and disappeared back behind the house without a word. It was a risky move, but it was the only way. Weeks crawled by. The court date loomed. CPS continued their visits, and I continued to feel a gnawing anxiety. Had Hope understood? Was she safe? Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my prepaid phone buzzed. It was a video message. My heart leaped into my throat. I opened it, my hands clammy. The video was shaky, taken from a low angle, clearly hidden. It showed Johnny, his back to the camera, yelling at Zachary, who was huddled on the floor. Johnny's hand shot out, and I saw it clearly, a sharp, open handed slap across Zachary's face. The sound was sickeningly clear. Zachary yelped, a small, pained sound. Then the camera panned slightly, revealing Reagan. She was standing a few feet away, watching. Her face was blank, frozen. She didn't move, didn't intervene, just watched. A small, almost inaudible whisper came from the phone's speaker. It was Hope. He told me to delete it. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt Zachary again. I sent it to you first. Hope's new video was the gut punch I needed. It was irrefutable. I immediately sent it to Keith, along with a frantic text. This is it. This is what we needed. He called me back within minutes, his voice grim. Zoe, this changes everything. This is direct physical abuse, and Reagan's inaction is enabling. We'll submit this to the court immediately. It strengthens our case immensely. The legal action moved forward with a new urgency. The CPS caseworker, Nadine, was also informed, and I could tell from her tone that this video had shifted her perspective. The court date for the emergency custody petition was finally here. I walked into the courthouse with Keith by my side, my stomach a knot of nerves. The air was thick with tension. Reagan and Johnny were already there, sitting on a bench, looking like a picture of aggrieved innocence. Reagan was wearing a pale blue dress, her hair neatly styled, looking fragile. Johnny, in a suit, had his arm around her, a picture of supportive strength. They looked like they were attending a funeral, not defending themselves against child abuse allegations. When they saw me, Reagan's face hardened. Johnny gave me a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. The hearing began. The judge, a stern faced woman in her late 50s, listened impassively as Keith presented our case, detailing the history, the anonymous tip, the initial flash drive, and finally, Hope's most recent video. He played the clip of Johnny slapping Zachary, and the sound of the slap echoed through the quiet courtroom. Reagan flinched, but Johnny just scoffed, shaking his head slightly. Then it was Reagan's lawyer's turn. She was a sharp, aggressive woman who immediately went on the offensive. She painted me as a bitter, childless woman, obsessed with her sister's family, trying to steal her children out of jealousy. Ms. Warren has a history of animosity towards her sister's husband, Mr. Sutton, the lawyer stated, her voice dripping with insinuation. She has never approved of their marriage, and this is clearly an attempt to disrupt a happy family out of resentment and envy. Reagan then took the stand. She cried on cue, talking about how much she loved her children, how devoted she was, how heartbroken she was by these false and malicious accusations from her own sister. My sister Zoe has always been unstable. Reagan sniffled, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She's single. She's never had children of her own, and I think she just can't stand to see me happy. She's always tried to control my life. Then came Johnny. He was smooth, charismatic, playing the victim perfectly. He presented receipts, not for the Bali trip, but for family counseling sessions, for new toys for the kids, for a recent family vacation. He even had a printout of my initial Venmo transfer of $4,800, which he claimed was a loan I'd given Reagan for personal expenses, not for escape. He spun a narrative where I was the unstable one, the one with a history of delusions about their relationship. He even subtly implied that I might have mental health issues, making me sound unhinged. My sister in law has always had a vivid imagination, Johnny said, shaking his head sadly. She sees things that aren't there. It's truly unfortunate that she's dragged our children into her personal vendetta against me. My blood was boiling, but Keith had warned me to remain calm, to let them dig their own graves. I could feel Nadine Freeman's eyes on me from the back of the courtroom, a silent reminder to keep my temper in check. The children were brought in separately, one by one, to be interviewed by the judge in chambers with a court appointed advocate present: Hope, Zachary, and Tabitha. I couldn't see them, but I imagined their small, terrified faces. When Hope was cross examined about the videos, the advocate read out her statements. Hope confirmed she had taken them, that Johnny had slapped Zachary, and that her mother had watched. But under the pressure, the fear, and the weight of her parents' presence in the courtroom, she started to cry. Her voice was small and shaky, and she couldn't elaborate much beyond confirming her previous statements. It was enough, but not as strong as I'd hoped. The judge listened to everything, her face impassive. After all the testimony, she announced her decision. Given the conflicting testimonies, the severity of the allegations, and the need for further investigation into the children's living situation, I am delaying a final ruling on emergency custody. My heart sank. Delay? After all this? I am ordering a full review by Child Protective Services, the judge continued. This will include home visits, interviews with the children at school, and psychological evaluations for all parties involved. Until then, the children will remain in the home. But Mr. Sutton, you are ordered to maintain strict distance from the children, especially Zachary, and to refrain from any physical discipline. Ms. Underwood, you are ordered to cooperate fully with CPS and ensure the children's safety. She looked directly at Reagan and Johnny. Any further incidents, any attempts to obstruct the investigation, will result in immediate removal of the children. It wasn't the immediate victory I'd hoped for, but it wasn't a loss either. It was a reprieve, a chance for Nadine to dig deeper. As we were leaving the courthouse, navigating the crowded hallway, Nadine Freeman caught my eye. She walked over, her voice low. "You're winning, Ms. Warren. Don't lose your temper." "They're unraveling, even if it doesn't look like it now." I nodded, trying to absorb her words. Then, as Keith and I stepped out into the parking lot, a shadow fell over me. Johnny. He'd followed us out. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes glinting with a cold, dangerous light. Reagan was nowhere in sight. "You think you know her?" He sneered, his voice barely above a whisper but laced with venom. You think you're so smart? Your sister would lie about you faster than breathe. She'll turn on you, Zoe, just like she turns on everyone else. He gave me one last chilling smile, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. His words, meant to scare me, only solidified my resolve. He was right about one thing: Reagan would lie, and she would turn. But this time, I wouldn't be the one she turned on. This time, I was fighting back. Johnny's words in the parking lot had rattled me, but not in the way he intended. It wasn't fear he instilled, but a cold clarity. He was right about Reagan's capacity for betrayal, her willingness to lie. But he underestimated my resolve. I wasn't fighting for Reagan anymore. I was fighting for the children she was failing. The weeks following the court hearing were a tense waiting game. CPS was conducting its full review, and Nadine was in constant contact with me, asking for more details, more context. I knew she was interviewing the children at school, away from their parents' influence. It was agonizing, not knowing what they were saying, how much they were revealing. Then, one night, about a month after the hearing, Reagan showed up at my apartment. It was late, past 10 o'clock, and I was already in bed. The doorbell rang insistently, a frantic, prolonged buzz that made me jump. I peered through the peephole, my heart sinking when I saw her. She was disheveled, her hair a mess, her eyes wild. And she wasn't alone. Hope, Zachary, and Tabitha were huddled behind her, looking small and terrified. Tabitha, my 5-year-old niece, was clutching a worn teddy bear, her face tear streaked. I opened the door, just a crack. Reagan, what are you doing here? It's late. Let me in, Zoe, she shrieked, pushing against the door. I need to see my kids. You're keeping them from me. I'm not keeping them from you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but my anger was simmering. The court ordered a review. You're supposed to be cooperating. You shouldn't be here. You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? She spat, her voice rising. You think you're better than me because you have your perfect little life. You're just jealous, Zoe. Jealous I got a family, jealous I got a husband who loves me. Her words were a barrage of venom, cutting through the thin veneer of my composure. My jaw tightened. Reagan, this isn't about me. This is about the kids. They're scared. They need safety, not this. I gestured vaguely at her erratic behavior. Safety? She shrieked, her face contorting. I give them safety. You're trying to steal them from me. You've always wanted to steal my life. Before I could react, she lunged forward, her hand flashing out. A sharp, stinging slap landed across my cheek. It wasn't hard enough to really hurt, but the shock of it, the sheer audacity, left me stunned. You're just jealous I got a family, she wailed again, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face, a grotesque parody of a grieving mother. But it was Tabitha's cry that truly fractured something inside me. My youngest niece, my sweet, innocent Tabitha, who usually had a smile for everyone, was openly sobbing in my doorway, clinging to Zachary, her little body shaking. Her eyes, wide and terrified, were fixed on her mother, not me. In that moment, staring at Tabitha's tear streaked face, seeing the raw fear in her eyes, I realized the truth. Reagan wasn't just wounded, not just a victim of her past or Johnny's abuse, she was cruel. She was actively harming her children, using them as pawns, exposing them to her own instability and Johnny's violence. The sister I'd tried to protect, the sister I'd given everything to help, was gone, replaced by this toxic, manipulative shell. My hand went to my stinging cheek. The anger that had been simmering for months, for years, finally boiled over. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage, but a cold, clear, unyielding fury. Get out, I said, my voice low and steady, a dangerous calm settling over me. Get out of my sight, Reagan. You are not welcome here, and you will not bring my nieces and nephew to my door like this again. She recoiled, momentarily stunned by my tone. Johnny must have been nearby because I heard his voice call out, Reagan, what's taking so long? She hesitated, then turned and stumbled away, dragging the children with her. Tabitha's sobs faded as they disappeared down the hall. The next morning, I called Keith. I need to file a motion, I told him, my voice flat. A motion to restrict Reagan's contact with the children, supervised visitation only, and I want a restraining order against her for myself. Keith didn't argue. He understood. This wasn't just about the kids anymore, it was about protecting myself from Reagan's escalating instability. A few days later, my prepaid phone buzzed again. It was Hope. This time, it wasn't a video for me. Aunt Zoe, her whispered voice came through the line. I gave Nadine a new video. She said it was good. She said it would help. My heart leaped. What was it, sweetie? It was Johnny, Hope whispered, her voice barely audible. He was yelling at Mom. He said it was the little one's fault she was crying. And Mom said yes. She said it was Zachary and Tabitha's fault. She was clinging to Johnny. She agreed with him. The phone went silent. Reagan agreeing with Johnny that her own children were to blame for her pain. That was the final, sickening piece of the puzzle. Hope, sharp and protective, had seen it, documented it, and given it directly to the one person who could truly use it. Nadine? This was the breaking point. The day of the full court hearing arrived, heavy with anticipation. I walked in with Keith, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. The culmination of months of fear, anger, and a desperate fight for children who deserved so much more. Reagan and Johnny were already there, sitting at their table. They were both dressed in pristine white, a deliberate choice, no doubt, to project an image of purity and innocence. Reagan looked serene, almost ethereal, her face composed. Johnny, beside her, had a confident, almost smug smirk playing on his lips. They looked like they were ready to perform, to charm the judge and the entire courtroom. The courtroom was quiet, almost eerily so. Nadine Freeman was there, sitting a few rows back, her gaze steady and reassuring when she met my eyes. The hearing began. Keith presented our case, methodically laying out the timeline of abuse, the anonymous tip, the initial flash drive. He then introduced Hope's videos, the ones she'd sent to me, and crucially, the final one she'd given directly to Nadine. The judge nodded, and a court clerk began to play the videos on a large screen visible to everyone in the room. The first clip, Johnny grabbing Zachary by the collar, filled the screen. The sound of Zachary's cries, raw and terrified, echoed through the silent courtroom. Johnny scoffed, a loud, dismissive sound. Kids lie, he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. They exaggerate. He was just being dramatic. Reagan nodded beside him, her face still composed, though a flicker of unease crossed her features. Then came the video of Johnny slapping Zachary's face, the sharp crack of the slap, Zachary's yelp of pain, and then the camera panning to Reagan, frozen, watching. The courtroom turned icy. You could feel the collective gasp, the shift in the air. Reagan's composure began to crack. She turned pale, her eyes darting around the room. But the final video, the one Hope had given to Nadine, was the most damning. It was short, grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. Johnny's voice accusing the children. It's the little one's fault she was crying. And then Reagan's soft, almost submissive voice agreeing. Yes, it's their fault. They make me cry. The image of Reagan clinging to Johnny, her face twisted in a pathetic attempt to appease him, was sickening. Johnny's scoff died on his lips. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Reagan's face was now ashen, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. She looked like she might vomit. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the faint recorded sound of Zachary's whimpers on the tape. The judge, who had remained impassive throughout, now looked directly at Reagan and Johnny. Her gaze was piercing, unwavering. She didn't need to say a word. Her expression spoke volumes. Reagan's lawyer tried to object, to argue that the videos were taken out of context, that they were manipulated, that the children were coached. But it was too late. The raw emotion, the undeniable truth in those shaky clips, had already done its work. The judge cleared her throat. I have reviewed all the evidence presented, she began, her voice firm and clear. I have considered the testimonies, the reports from Child Protective Services, and most importantly, the visual and auditory evidence provided by the children themselves. She looked at Reagan, then at Johnny. Mr. Sutton, your actions, as documented in these videos, constitute a pattern of physical and emotional abuse towards these children. Your attempts to dismiss this as discipline or exaggeration are frankly appalling. Then she turned her gaze to Reagan. Ms. Underwood, your failure to protect your children, your active participation in their emotional gaslighting, and your willingness to blame them for your own distress is a profound dereliction of your parental duty. Reagan was openly weeping now, not the quiet, controlled tears from the previous hearing, but loud, ragged sobs. Johnny sat stiffly beside her, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. Therefore, the judge continued, her voice rising with authority, effective immediately, I am granting full guardianship of Hope Sutton, Zachary Sutton, and Tabitha Sutton to Miss Zoe Warren by emergency statute. This guardianship is temporary, pending a full review of Ms. Underwood's ability to provide a safe and stable environment for her children, which will require extensive therapy and demonstrable change. Assertoire, Mr. Sutton, you are ordered to vacate the family home immediately and are hereby issued a restraining order prohibiting you from being within 500 feet of the children at any time. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. The gavel came down with a resounding thud. Gavel. The sound echoed through the courtroom, final and absolute. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. It was done. They were safe. Hope, who had been sitting quietly with her advocate, suddenly stood up. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were bright with unshed tears, but also with a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in a long time: joy. She looked at me, then ran. Not to her mother, not to Johnny. She ran straight into my arms. I knelt down, wrapping my arms around her, holding her tight. She buried her face in my shoulder, her small body trembling. From the corner of my eye, I saw Reagan. She had risen from her seat, her hand outstretched, a desperate, pathetic plea on her face. Hope, my baby. But Hope didn't move. She stayed pressed against me, her grip tight. She didn't even glance at her mother. She stepped back, just an inch, still clinging to me, but clearly putting distance between herself and Reagan. The message was clear, and it was devastating. The judge's gavel had barely stopped echoing when Keith put a hand on my shoulder. It's over, Zoe. For now. I just nodded, my eyes still fixed on Hope, who was clinging to me, her small body shaking with silent sobs. Reagan stood frozen, her hand still outstretched, a picture of pathetic desperation. Johnny was already being escorted out by a bailiff, his face a thundercloud. The next hour was a blur of paperwork, signing documents that officially made me the temporary guardian of Hope, Zachary, and Tabitha. My hands trembled as I scrawled my signature, each stroke feeling monumental. I was 34 now. Hope was 13, Zachary 10, and Tabitha had just turned 6 a few months ago. In a single afternoon, my quiet, solitary life had been irrevocably altered. I was a mother of 3. Nadine Freeman stayed with me, guiding me through the process, her usual hardened demeanor softened by a quiet satisfaction. You did good, Zoe, she said, her voice low. Those kids are going to have a chance now. Getting the kids settled in my apartment was a chaotic whirlwind. My small 2-bedroom space suddenly felt impossibly cramped. We crammed 2 twin beds into my spare room for Hope and Tabitha, and Zachary got a sleeping bag on the living room floor, at least for the first few nights. There were no more silent evenings for me. My apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet, was now filled with the sounds of children, whispered conversations, the rustle of blankets, the occasional nightmare cry. Bedtime stories became my new ritual. I'd never read a children's book in my life, but I learned quickly. The Very Hungry Caterpillar for Tabitha, Harry Potter for Zachary, and for Hope, who was too old for picture books, but too young to be fully independent. Just quiet talks about her day, about school, about anything but what they'd left behind. Therapy started almost immediately. Nadine had arranged for a child psychologist specializing in trauma. It was a slow, arduous process. Zachary, especially, was withdrawn. He still wet the bed sometimes, but now, instead of shame, he was met with quiet understanding and clean sheets. Tabitha, who had stopped smiling around the time the abuse escalated, slowly, tentatively began to find her joy again. Her laughter, a bright, clear sound, was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Reagan, true to form, tried to appeal the ruling, but with the restraining order against Johnny and the court's clear stance, her efforts were futile. The judge upheld the guardianship, reiterating that Reagan would only be granted supervised visitation and only after demonstrating significant personal progress and stability. She was ordered to attend therapy to prove she could provide a safe environment. I knew it would be a long, long road for her if she ever even started it. Johnny, the charming abuser, vanished from social platforms. His carefully curated image of the loving husband and father evaporated the moment he lost control. The last I heard, he'd moved out of state, likely to find new victims to manipulate. Karma, I hoped, would find him eventually. One quiet, rainy afternoon, a few months after they moved in, Hope found me in the kitchen. Zachary and Tabitha were engrossed in a board game in the living room. She leaned against the counter, watching me make dinner. Aunt Zoe? She said softly, her voice still carrying a hint of the vulnerability I'd first heard on the phone. Yeah, sweetie? I turned, wiping my hands on a towel. She looked at me, her eyes clear and steady. I knew you'd come. My throat tightened. I couldn't speak. I just reached out, pulling her into a hug. She hugged me back, a firm, confident embrace. This wasn't the terrified 12-year-old whispering from a closet anymore. This was a resilient, brave 13-year-old, finally finding her footing. Life was different now. My emergency fund was long gone, spent on beds and clothes and school supplies. My apartment was never truly quiet, but the silence I'd once cherished felt empty compared to the vibrant, sometimes messy reality of having them here. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed with a notification, a Venmo alert. I opened it, curious. It was from Reagan, a payment of $50. The note underneath read, "For the kids, not you." I stared at the screen for a long moment. $50 out of the $4,800 she'd used to fund her Bali retreat with her abuser. $50, sent with a bitter, passive aggressive note. It was so utterly, perfectly Reagan. A short, sharp laugh escaped me. It wasn't a bitter laugh, not entirely. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated triumph. She was still trying to get under my skin, still trying to control the narrative, even with a paltry $50. But it didn't work anymore. Her power over me, over the kids, was gone. I deleted the Venmo app from my phone. I didn't need her money, and I didn't need her drama. I had my family now, and they were finally safe.